So I know this is one we've heard before. We hear it a lot in work and just reading in general. What is the difference between leading and managing? And is one more important than the other?
Great question. And yes, you do. And it seems like it's not new.
Mhm.
I remember when it was relatively new, when people started really seem to be focusing on leadership and almost denigrating management. Management is what you do to things, or management is about things, and leadership is about people. And what started happening was you had a lot of lack of accountability. Now, what we hear a lot of is people worrying and complaining because they don't have a culture of accountability. So we need to understand the different roles that management and leadership play, and also how they work together. For instance, I worked with one CEO for years. He would always say, acceptable behavior is whatever you allow it to be. It made me always wonder, are we sacrificing accountability for feel good motivation? A lot of times we think of leadership as motivating, coaching, which has its role. Matter of fact, we'll talk about this in a little bit. In the end of our book, Influence on Purpose, 5 Principles for Leaders to Create Regenerative Cultures, I know, shameless plug. In the end of the book, there's a really good tool for identifying leadership and management. And what we talk about there is leadership is about those coaching opportunities. It's about creating alignment, motivation. It's the willing part of the willing and able. And then management is the able part of the willing and able. And they have to work well together. So let me show you something. I'm going to pull up a whiteboard here real quick. I'm going to show you, think a little bit about many of us have children, or probably all of us at one point or another was a child. So think about a brand new baby. The line above is leadership, the line below is management. If you have a brand new baby, when that baby's born, it's 100% management. If you don't manage this child's life, she's going to die, right? You have to feed, house, clean. You just have to take care of everything. By the time this child is, oh gosh, a couple of years old, right? All of a sudden, you're putting in some leadership. It's nice to share. That's not how we treat people. So we're starting to teach them things about interacting with others. By the time they're a teenager, you better be pretty good at leading, or you're going to get a lot of rebellion. Because if you try to totally manage a teenager's life, they're going to fight back. By this time, hopefully, you have the credibility to share a vision, to help them understand a sense of mission in life, right? They have a core set of values that they've learned. That's the leadership side of things. There's still going to be some management. I was just talking with my wife about this earlier. Now, all of our children are grown, but we were talking about this idea of uh, leading with faith, right? And not controlling or making decisions for your child, letting them make a few mistakes. Now, at this age, there's still going to be some parameters. At this age, there's still going to be, I might say, your life philosophies are yours. They're between you and God. And I'll help you figure that out, but I'm not going to tell you what you have to believe. Now, if you think that your belief system means that you don't have to clean up after yourself, or you can stay out all night, or you don't have to participate in the family, well, you're probably going to have to wait a few years to exercise that particular belief system, because there are still some things that we're going to manage at home. By the time your children are adults, all you got left is leadership. If you try to manage your adult child, which sometimes people do, um, some groups figure they can browbeat, shun, lecture an adult and somehow get good results out of that. I don't know that anyone's ever had that happen well. By that time, you're totally leading. The same thing happens if I'm a new employee, no matter how smart and capable I am. just to get oriented into the new job is going to take some management. Over time, as I learn the job, then I'm going to be able to do more for myself. A lot of times you'll hear, I'm going to throw this word in, micromanagement. People talk about micromanagement a lot.
And so that's a popular one.
It is a popular one. So when people start talking about, it's usually they say, I'm not going to micromanage. I worked with one executive who had someone stepping up into a management role who had been with the company for probably over 30 years, 20, really close to or just beyond 30 years. They had been a superstar the whole time there. They were excellent at their job, loved it. They loved the company. The company was their family or his family. And he got promoted into a new role because he was so very successful. Many of you will recognize that as the Peter principle as I talk some more about this. And he was failing. We went through the measurement, again, kind of the assessment that's available at the end of the book I mentioned. We went through that together and found that he was really failing at his job. He was highly motivated. He was well aligned with the company's core values. He was an absolute keeper, but he was failing at his job. As we talked about it, we figured out that the reason he wasn't succeeding was he was now in charge of other people. He had management and leadership responsibilities, which he had not had before. And when I asked, well, what kind of support are you giving this guy? He said, well, he's been around a long time and he's so good at his job, I don't want to micromanage him. My question was, then you've chosen, or my observation at least was, so you've chosen to abandon him. And this was a smart leader. It didn't take him but a second to say, oh, I see what you're talking about. He's in a new role. We needed to kind of go back down this scale a little bit and provide some more management to help him learn the skills required at the new job. Wouldn't take him long to get them, but he did need to move that. So micromanagement simply means more management than that individual needs at that time in those circumstances. Okay. It's individual, it's time bound, and it's circumstantial. This person who was a superstar at his job before was in a new role. So for a time, he needed a different level of management and interaction to help support him, train him, give him the tools and resources he need to succeed at a new level. So think about this as time goes on, the need to manage reduces and your opportunity to lead increases. You may need to step back once in a while in new circumstances, or maybe the person just going through a challenge and they need a little more support for a while. But if you keep those two things in mind and have a vision for where you're going, you can balance them along as you go. And you're always assessing and reassessing and adapting. What does this person need right now? And by the way, that's not you don't have to be psychic to know this. You just have to have two ears. Listen, ask the question, notice, are they struggling? And then figure out what you need to do to help them. I didn't plan to totally promote the book. Obviously, I want you to look it up, and I think it'll be very, very helpful for you. But that tool in that final chapter of the book is really, it's funny, if I were to change anything about the book we wrote, it would be the title of that last chapter. The title the title of the tool is about assessing team trust. It's about assessing trust. It does do that. However, what it really does is helps me as a leader understand the level of stewardship I have for someone and how I can best assist them in accomplishing their goal or their mission. So anyway, that's when we think a little bit about micromanagement, there's no such thing as some hard and fast micromanagement. It's not like people will often talk about that. I don't micromanage, or I like to get into the weeds, right? If you're leading with your style of leadership and management, you're going to be wrong probably about 70% of the time. because it requires you understanding the needs of the person being led and what they need from you right now and
So I've
providing
heard
that.
you say before, a good leader is a good manager plus. You can't
Yeah,
be a good leader unless you, reminds me of, I don't know if anyone's seen the movie McClintock, right? Someone says, well, that's a gentleman. Well, you have to be a man first to be a gentleman. And he fails on both counts. That's what I think
yes,
of
I
every
remember
time. But it's good old John Wayne. So for leading and managing, you have to be able to go back to the mission of the company. You have to begin with the end in mind. You have to be able to go back to the values. So that's why these values, vision, mission aren't just pretty words. Everyone has to understand them, because a manager without this, without being rooted in these ideas of what is success in your company, cannot know when and how to transition to leadership when necessary. And a leader can't manage properly to help everyone accomplish this shared mission.
exactly. So, and I think that's really kind of takes us back to our first point, doesn't it, a little bit? Because you have to be a good manager and then add leadership to that. If you try to lead without management, it's just cheerleading. There's really no accountability. There's no clarity that comes from that very often. There's no follow through. There's no structure, and you're just drifting. So that ability to understand what is good management, at the very, very fundamentals, it's making sure that people have a very clear understanding. And this is so simple. Many of those who listen will be familiar with this, right? Fundamentals. Who does what by when? In other words, are the assignments and expectations very, very clear? Most even fair managers are pretty good at that. That's not the hardest part, right? But it can still be overlooked. Am I specific? Am I making assignment to an individual? Now, that person may have a team they work with, but if I'm making an assignment vaguely to a group, that's just not going to work. There's going to be a lot of finger pointing and blame later. There's going to be one person owns it. If I'm following up later, I want to talk to one person. How'd you do on that assignment? Do you still need help? Where are we at now? Right? It's a conversation with an individual. So the who is an individual, does what very clearly. What's the picture of what success will look like? By when? ASAP won't count, right? It's not going to be, oh, whenever you get around to it, or even as soon as possible. Put it on the calendar, put a time to it, make sure that you're very clear. Now, if something happens and you need to change that, then that's a conversation. But at least start out with absolute clarity who does what by when. Now, the next part of management is the part that most often, if something's going to get overlooked, this gets overlooked. I've measured this in dozens of companies, and I've found people always have done a better job of making assignments than they do at following up on the assignment. And so the trick there, if there's a trick to be had, is to make sure that right up front you have a strategy agreed upon for follow-up. Once the assignment is made very clear, make sure both people understand what follow-up is going to look like. A lot of times people feel micromanaged because there was no follow-up strategy agreed upon. And so when the person does follow up, hey, how's that going? If they're in the middle of it and feel like they're well underway and that the follow-up was too soon or premature in any way, they feel micromanaged, right? The other person is just doing their job and following up. The problem is they didn't agree up front. What is that going to look like? If I've made the assignment, then we might talk about what does follow-up need to look like? It might be something that someone will do and it's going to be done, and we'll just talk about it in our next meeting. Did it get done? Yes or no? If it's a long project, we'll say, what are the checkpoints along the way? And so will we follow up once a week? Will we follow up in a month? Will we follow up daily? What's that going to look like? What kind of support will you need to make sure that we're moving the ball forward? Once that's done, then when I follow up, there's no shock, there's no surprise. No one feels insulted by me saying, how's that going? Or did you get that done? So those are probably the two major parts of management that now there are systems, operating systems that help But that's really all that does is create accountability after we've got clarity for assignments. The leadership part, that's making sure that, if you remember if anyone who's read Stephen Covey's Seven Habits, and if you haven't, highly recommend the book, even though it's been around for a long, long time now. He talks about uh, cutting a path through a forest, and they're making great progress, being very, very efficient. And then all of a sudden, someone climbs a tree and looks around and yells out to everyone down there making the path, "Hey, we're in the wrong forest." So all of that efficiency wasn't effective when they were in the wrong part, in the wrong area, right? So having a clear vision of what success needs to look like, that's leadership, making sure that people are oriented toward the right goal or within the right vision.
Yeah. So in the Marine Corps, it took me a while to recognize these principles we talk about, because in the Marine Corps, it's the Marines, right? We have a reputation for being very regimented and very exact. And it's a command style leadership. There's no questions about any of that. But after a while, I started to realize that these principles are present. That's why it works. One of the books we're required to read as little junior Marines is Letter to Garcia. I forget who it's by, but it's this story about a lieutenant who is required to send a message, get a message to someone named Garcia. That's it. That's all he's got. I think he's got the general continent of where he needs to end up, where this Garcia is. And he says, okay, great. He goes off and he does it. And this is held up as the standard of just get the job done. No excuses, no whining. You know what the goal is, figure out how to accomplish it and do it. Behind all of that is a lot of work and management and training and build up, right? They didn't pull this little recruit out of boot camp and say, get this done. Obviously, that would be setting him up to fail. They pulled a lieutenant who has gone through some training and some school and has experience and who knew the mission. If you know the mission and you know the outcome you want and you have parameters of these are our values, right? Every company should have values. These are our principles that we follow. These are our customers, our stakeholders. This is who we serve and how we serve them. Then to get the mission accomplished, even when you have not enough information, or if you're starting out a whole new department, a whole new project, you can do that. If you don't have all those tools and all those support, you can't do that. So that's that vision of leadership and that management behind it of we trained you to accomplish this. You know how to do this.
Very good. You know what that made me think of? It's something I would call the anatomy of trust, right? What is trust made of? If you trust, like you said, if you trusted just a raw recruit who'd never had any training to do some big assignment, well, you failed as a leader because you set that person up to fail. What have you done before? We'll talk in another video about delegation, but delegation requires cultivation, right? And since our thing is regenerative culture, that fits nicely, right? But what is the anatomy of trust? What do you have to have in place to trust that person so that you can lead them? And that's really also where that assessment I mentioned earlier comes in, is I need to know you have alignment with our values, you have a clear sense of our vision, and you know who our stakeholders are and how we serve them. I need to know those things. And that's, you understand our mission, right? After that, that's the leadership side, or at least the willing side. After that, I need to know, do you have the time, the talent, the team, and the tools required to accomplish what's being asked of you or what this assignment is, right? And the other thing I want to know is, in the past, have you gotten results for similar assignments? Right? Also, that all of that will tell me what's needed from me as your manager leader, what kind of support, how clear does the assignment need to be, what kind of follow-up will be required. If I know those things, I've created an atmosphere or conditions for trust where my expectations are probably going to be met. If any one of those are missing, then that'll help me to know what's required of me, right? If you don't have a clear sense of the mission, I need to provide some coaching on that. If you don't have a vision, coaching for that. If it looks like now you have all the skill in the world, but it's not a one person job. You're going to need others to help you. I need to make sure that team's available, right? If you don't have the skills, am I providing training? That sort of thing. So that idea of I love that letter to Garcia because you know that person had been qualified for that task ahead of time.
Mhm.
And maybe it was a stretch task. It probably was. They usually are,
Probably,
but it was a reasonable stretch. It wasn't throw the guy in and let him drown stretch, which isn't a stretch at all.
right? No. Okay. So really, this dichotomy is it's a false dichotomy of management, leadership, which is better, is one good, one bad, because you need both.
Yeah.
You cannot be a good leader without having some management skills, without creating a culture of accountability. You cannot be a good manager unless you know where you are going. Where are you? You are still a leader. Where are people going to end up when this assignment is finished? When we get to work, what is everybody doing and why?
If I have a good vision for the mission that I'm to accomplish and the people that I have stewardship for to help in accomplishing that mission, all of this makes sense because I'm able to look at the individual and assess their needs and provide what they require to accomplish the goals, right? So it's not about whether I'm being a manager or a leader right now. It's about all that stuff is in my toolbox. And when I work with this individual, I know which tools they need from me to be successful at any given time.
Right? I like that. All good leaders and managers have a toolbox. And you just pull out the right skill at the right time, and you begin with the end in mind.
There you go. That
All
works
right.
for me.
Thanks.